It would probably be best if I start this off by addressing the elephant in the room. I'm extremely late to the party here because Hades was released a while ago and here I am just now making a video about it. But as you can see, I'm probably just the best YouTuber you have in your subscription feed that is always consistent with their videos and makes sure to release things on time. So I mean, you could probably expect that it would have went like this. I took a little break from YouTube, but I'm back to drag my channel's corpse out of the sticks just like I do with Zagreus each run, and talk to you about one of my favorite games I've ever played, and why you should care about it. The roguelike genre is kind of an odd one over the past few years. It's honestly hard to define what makes a roguelike, because it seems like the guidelines and rules seem to kind of be a moving target. But generally boiling it down to like the very principal features, it's a game where you start from zero and work your way through a run, eventually complete your task or die and start it over again from that 0 point. There's typically a huge emphasis on RNG elements in these games as well, making it to where you're incentivized to try a new run and see what you get along the way for new upgrades or any sort of unlockables. Honestly, Hades does follow this format in a way that's not too groundbreaking until you look at more of the other aspects of what make it great. Giving a bit of background on the story of this game, you play as Zagreus, the son of Hades. Tired of the oppressive life laid out by your father, you try to escape the underworld. The gods in Olympus hear about this and attempt to aid you by supplying powerful boons that upgrade your abilities, attacks, and movesets, and also the way that Zagreus actively and passively functions for the rest of the run. The rewards for each room are different each run, the enemies you encounter, the boons you collect, the dialogue you receive when talking to NPCs, it's always different from the previous run. This game perfectly captures the desire that can be so dangerous about these games, pushing you to play just one more run when you're on your 30th last run of the night. But the random factor is far from the only component of this game that draws many players in. There are so many reasons to love this game, so I'll briefly break them down. Starting with the first one, Hades combat is one of the stronger, if not the strongest elements that drew me into the game initially. Hades heavily encourages you to find a playstyle or multiple playstyles that allow you to take minimal damage while dishing out as much as you possibly can. This can be achieved in several different ways. There are 6 different weapons you can choose from. After you pick that up, you find upgrades along your run to augment the way that you are playing from there. For instance, I usually like using the bow in Hades. This really allows me to be able to shoot and reposition over and over again, which keeps me pretty safe and out of the fight if I can, but also lets me be mobile and do a lot of damage while not really taking much. And the abilities that you use along the way can be altered by the boons that you find from the Olympian gods, and each god typically has a specialty in what they deliver. For instance, Poseidon has this ability where any attack that you augment or dash or anything that you're using the boon on usually will knock enemies away in an AoE, and if that enemy hits a wall or terrain or anything like that, they'll take additional damage. It's a really effective one to cause chaos and also keep yourself safe by pushing enemies away. Also looking at somebody like Dionysus, you can empower your attacks to inflict hangover. It's a damage over time effect similar to poison that can stack on enemies. And honestly, it just kind of goes from there. A lot of them you can kind of figure out what you would think like Zeus would do. But the nice thing about Hades is that its RNG doesn't typically feel unfair. It always feels like if you're skilled enough, you can make it through the run. Obviously some builds do synergize better together, but the benefit of these boons being largely passive makes it to where your game plan doesn't have to change run to run, to where then if you get bad luck that you're not able to progress. To go into more of the variety that allows the combat to feel fresh, there's also different systems like Hephaestus hammers, which you can find along the way in your runs, which will allow you to augment your weapon for the rest of that run. So being it safe for the bow, for instance, you can power up your attacks to where if you're closer to an enemy you'll do more damage. You can make it to where your charge up attack takes less time. You can find one where you can shoot 3 different bolts per attack that you use, things sort of like that. There's also another system that lets you permanently upgrade your weapon outside of this to change them to do similar sorts of upgrades, but it's more of like a permanent unlock that you can select if you want to use it, or you can go with the default bow or anything like that. Since we mentioned before there's 6 different weapons that you can choose from, each of those weapons also have 4 different aspects you can unlock, making it toward just before you even start your run, you have 24 different possibilities that you can choose from for your weapons. Then from there, when you start the run, you have all the RNG to get random boons and upgrades, making it pretty clear that you can get a large amount of variety when starting each of your runs. Another cool system is the game tries to encourage you and incentivize you to try different weapons you don't usually use. Typically when you go to your armory area, you'll see one of the weapons glowing with like this aura, it's like a dark aura, and if you select that weapon and go through the run, you'll find more in-game currency along your run, rewarding you for trying something new. Obviously, you can ignore this, you don't have to do it, but it is a nice incentive to get you to keep trying different weapons even if you don't think it quite clicks, because sometimes you just need that extra run just to get to know how it works, and then it might be something you end up enjoying. But once again, this is just another way for them to make sure the game can feel fresh should you choose to buy into this system. Moving on from combat, another very strong attribute that Hades excels at is its characters. Each god or character you meet has a strong sense of identity that makes them stand out. I really enjoyed Supergiant's approach to preserve a piece of what you already know about these characters, but also not be afraid to put a fun spin on their personality. And honestly, the art and character design of these characters is one of my favorite depictions of these characters. And what's really cool is these characters are fleshed out by an extensive amount of dialogue that seems like it takes a while to exhaust all of it. After a very large amount of runs and playing this game for a ridiculous amount of hours, I still haven't exhausted the dialogue that's possible. Typically when you go on a run, the first time you run into an Olympian god and get their boon, they have a unique line that they'll tell you, and you might have a conversation back and forth. Also, after each run in between, you have a lot of downtime to be able to talk to different characters and also progress your relationship with them. This is one of my favorite parts of the game that I'm going to mention a little bit more in depth in this next section. It always feels like you're moving forward in the story, almost like an RPG. Because a lot of times when you're building these relationships with characters, it'll actually change something in the game. You might fix relationship between two different characters, you might build a relationship between Zagreus and X character, you might even get unlockables by working through this relationship with another character as well. So it always rewards you for spending time to slow down and talk to characters and get this unique story. Which once again is something I wasn't really expecting in a roguelike. Typically it's much more focused on just the journey or the run, rather than actually making progression in a story or anything with your character even progression-wise. That's where we're going to delve into the next piece of what makes Hades so enjoyable for me, is the fact that it breaks the roguelike meta by giving you a lot more progression. In most roguelikes, when you die, you lose absolutely everything, but there's some element of unlockable content. Take Enter the Gungeon, for example. After you meet a certain benchmark or get a certain amount of in-game currency, you can purchase the opportunity for another gun or weapon to appear on your next runs. But then again, it's not guaranteed, it's just giving you that chance to now see that thing you just unlocked. But with Hades, you actually can permanently upgrade Zagreus, your weapons, develop relationships. It kind of breaks out of the shell a little bit of what roguelikes usually do. While it still follows along with that quote-unquote 0 point every time between runs, there's a lot of systems such as like the Darkness system, which is a currency that you can use to actually permanently upgrade Zagreus. This will give you cool things like extra lives, more damage in different situations, upgrade the drop rate on rarity of boons, all sorts of things like that you'll unlock and you'll have permanently from there each run. As I mentioned before, you can also unlock different aspects on weapons to change the way that they function entirely. As I mentioned before, developing those relationships with different characters gives a lot more of that sense of progression and forward momentum. And I think this is what really sets the game apart for me especially. Well, now that we've touched briefly on what makes Hades so good, we can finally start to explore why it's important. But to do that, we'll still need to back up a couple steps here, and look at the gaming industry as a whole. I'm sure that if you're pretty involved in the gaming industry, this won't be a new topic for you, but it's still a good conversation to have because it's important to bring up. Crunch is a large issue in the modern gaming industry. If you're not familiar with what crunch is, it's a mandatory period of overtime forced on employees when executives feel that a 40-hour workweek just won't cut it to meet the deadlines they have. And honestly, crunch is seldom shied away from by large companies such as CDPR, Rockstar, and Naughty Dog. Most of the time, crunch is enforced for months or even years. It's not a short period of time. And typically, it's not just like asking the person to stay for 5 more hours a week. Usually, it can push to 60 to 70 hours a week on average, or more. Some companies such as Rockstar have quoted explaining that some employees have worked 100-hour work weeks just to push out games like Red Dead Redemption 2. And while other companies like CDPR have announced that they do pay their employees for overtime, a lot of other bigger companies will pay their employees salary, and not very good salary, to make sure that they don't have to pay this overtime. These companies intentionally create cultures that discourage people from speaking up because why would they want people to change it? So if somebody does finally have the courage to say something about it, they'll just let them go and find somebody else that's not as vocal. While some incredible products have been created from crunch, it doesn't excuse the action. The most frustrating part of this is it never seems to be the employee's fault, but instead the fault of the leadership in place at these companies. These executives will have investors buy into their product with the promise that the investment will return by a certain deadline, and then by the mismanagement of leadership or the executives expecting to meet this deadline by utilizing crunch, the employees are subjected to an unpleasant work environment against their will. There are many ways out of this situation, but ultimately these executives that are higher up within the company are receiving a large amount of money by keeping business the way that it is. They still meet their ridiculous deadline, sell a game for millions, and make their investors happy, and they don't have to pay their employees any more than they already expected. The upside to this is we're seeing the effects of this business model. To my disappointment, CDPR's ridiculous crunch schedule produces a massively underwhelming product in Cyberpunk 2077. While I think I might cover Cyberpunk and, response to my own video of why I told you guys you should be hyped for that game and then I was super disappointed, probably just like you, that's probably a different video, so I'm gonna get into that later. But unless you're living under a rock, you're probably pretty aware of the current state of Cyberpunk and how disastrous its release was, and even how disastrous it currently is at the time of recording this video as well. Another good thing is this is getting a lot of publicity through other people as well. If you've read any of Jason Schreier's articles, he spent extensive hours documenting and exposing the drawbacks of this business model, allowing for the public to see and understand what these companies are doing to their employees. Another great channel to visit that does a very effective job at highlighting these issues and their effects is Jim Sterling. They do a great job at exposing what is wrong with the gaming industry and what to be aware of before supporting certain companies. I'll link to their channel below. Ultimately, I feel the crunch business model has been exposed multiple times over the years as a suboptimal approach, even when it comes to a finished product, but especially when it comes to providing a work environment that's healthy for employees to work at. But why did I go on this tangent about crunch? We're talking about Hades. What does this have to do with it? Well, we're finally at the point where I can actually make, the point of this video and talk about what Supergiant, the creators of Hades, does for their work environment and their take on crunch and other things related to that in the current gaming industry. Supergiant's executives have been interviewed multiple times from several different sources. Their approach to a work environment is much different from what we discussed earlier in other gaming companies. They've released several successful games such as Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and the topic of this video, Hades, which Hades alone has sold more than 1 million copies. So each game has been considered a financial success. That being said, let's look into their design philosophy when it comes to crunch and other factors of their work environment. Supergiant is a small team of 17 individuals, and crunch is not enforced. Their executives have admitted that they do allow overtime, but it's only when somebody asks specifically to have overtime. So say somebody's really excited about their piece of the project and they really want to keep working on it before the weekend, they'll let them do that, but they never force it upon somebody. Oftentimes they actually say that they check in on other employees to make sure that the load isn't too heavy on one person, and will redirect a lot of the work if they feel that it is. Their overall approach is to encourage a work environment that allows each member to thrive and provide their best work. And surprise, surprise, it allows their staff to be happy and continue to actually be passionate about the product they're working on. Supergiant also funds their own games with the money they accrue from the previous games they just released, eliminating the need for investors so they don't have to meet ridiculous deadlines. They can just make sure that the product is actually to the quality they want at the timeline they want. They also don't have a high turnover rate. The original team of 7 that worked on Bastion is still working for the company. Since then, they've brought on 10 more employees and they haven't left either. This displays the work environment is sustainable and has effectively allowed for their staff to pursue their passion for the project without burning out in the process. Another cool thing they do for their employees is they give them unlimited vacation time for every employee, and requires that each employee takes 20 days minimum off a year for them to rest and recharge and go take a vacation. There are many more reasons that make this company truly unique and respectable, and if you want to look into this a little bit more, I'll link to an article from Kotaku's Nathan Grayson. He goes into more detail and information that explains this company's philosophy and approach to game design, and it's a great read and I'd really recommend it. So to break this down, it was important to set up this video to make sure that I explained what makes Hades great. Then I also had to discuss the shortcomings of the gaming industry currently, and lastly, that allows us to look at Supergiant and explain how this company deviates from these common issues and provides excellent products with a lot of character and substance. Ultimately, we should want healthy work environments for all staff that work on games we love. After all, we work to live, not live to work. Sometimes it's hard to not look at most games that have come out in the last few years and just feel like there's not any passion behind it or anybody that cares about the product they're working on anymore. It always feels like they're just trying to sell you an addiction. And they could care less about your enjoyment, unless of course it turns you away from a potential sale. But that's what sets Hades apart. Each section of this game feels intentional. Each character, landscape, piece of dialogue, song, enemy, all of it feels like it was made by a group of individuals that genuinely care about providing a product that is fun, exciting, and impactful. Something that can only be achieved long-term by a company that values its employees and their well-being. And that feeling and business model is why I think you should care about Hades. Thank you guys for watching this one to the end. I really appreciate it a lot. Once again, I know I've been gone for a little while. I haven't made a whole lot of videos. I'm starting to try to get back into it a little bit. Honestly, I really struggled for a while with just making sure that I actually had ideas that I was happy about doing. I wanted to actually be excited if I was going to make videos too. This ultimately is just a hobby right now. It's not like I'm making any money off of, such a small channel, but I just want to make sure that it's something that I can make other people happy or make people think. And it's also something that obviously I want to make me happy too. Because like I said, it's just a hobby right now. The only compulsion for me to do it is because I enjoy doing it. And I think that also comes through with the content. If I don't enjoy it, then why would you want to watch it? So just know, these will be releasing at my own pace. I want to try to push myself to have a little bit more of an actual schedule. I'll let you guys know when I find something concrete, but I think once a week would be kind of what I'd preferably like to do, and I'll try to hold myself to that. But thank you again for everybody that stuck around, despite all of the lack of videos, and supported me throughout this whole process. I really appreciate you a lot. If you like this type of video and you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It really helps me out a lot. And if you could leave a like and a comment, it also helps the algorithm push my channel to other people that might like this content as well. And once again, I appreciate you all, and I'll see you all in the next video.